Scientologists pay thousands of dollars over many years for sessions with the e-meter. Confidential files are kept on church members. Former Scientologist and high-level Narconon staff member Jerry Whitfield says it was used in Narconon's drug treatment program.
It was. In the past, I had auditing when I was in Narconon, and I used the e-meter. It was used on me, and it was used from the very beginning. When I first got involved in '74, one of the first things that happened is they showed me how the e-meter worked.
As engrams from his lifetime were removed, devotees were encouraged to follow these problems back to birth, the womb, and finally to previous lifetimes. This is similar to what Crowley termed as the development of the magical memory. Having allowed the mind to return for some 100 times to the hour of birth, it should be encouraged to endeavor to penetrate beyond that period.
After 20 runs through birth, the patient experiences a recession of all semantics and unconsciousness and aberrative content. Thus, there was no inhibition about looking earlier than birth for what Dianetics had begun to call basic.
According to L Ron Jr., Hubbard Sr. continued with his own use of drugs and even used them in conjunction with the e-meter, continually jotting down the results.
I remember in 1952, while he was taking a needle in the arm containing cocaine, he grinned at me, winked wryly, and said, "Shades of Sherlock Holmes." Dad gave a lot of lectures on cocaines or stimulants of one kind or another. He would really get brilliant on the stuff. He started me out by mixing phenobarbital into my bubble gum when I was 10 years old. This was to induce deeper trances in order to practice the black magic and to get an avenue to power.
One of Scientology's most influential texts was said to have been created by these channels, with Ron Jr. acting as the drug channel.
In the new book, Scientology, A History of Man, Hubbard revealed human bodies were in fact inhabited by immortal souls, or thetans, going back to primeval times. Hubbard's son from his first marriage, Nibs, claimed the book stemmed from an unusual piece of drug-driven research.
LRH gave his son Nibs some amphetamines, and Nibs started talking, he said. Started really talking fast, speed. And he kept talking, and his dad kept giving him speed, and all of a sudden he was talking about his history when he was a clam and all these different situations in early Earth. And out of that came History of Man.
In early '52, he had just arrived from Wichita with Mary Sue. And the very first day I arrived, he wanted me audited immediately, but I had been driven all night. And I am 18 years old. I knew nothing about Scientology. All I had read was Dianetics, Modern Science and Mental Health. It never really interested me very much as a book when I was young. And so after about a couple of weeks there, we got involved, and he asked me to sit down on the couch, and I was high on Benzedrine, on pennies, and we started doing, quote, research on a book called History of Man. So we spent 3 days on that. Here's the book here, the Scientology, A History of Man. Here's a copy of it. And all of the incidents, he did a few with Mary Sue, but the majority of incidents in it were off the top of my head, as I had upwards of 20, 30 milligrams of bennies in.
It's a very small book for the History of Man.
Yes.
How many pages?
And this is, but the thing about this interesting thing about the book is that this is purported to be, it is presented as, these are incidents which are common to everybody's past. This is the PR output. This is the thrust of the book, is that these are early genetic incidents in the ancient primordial past of each and every man, woman, and child on Earth. And they came out of my drug trip. And I don't know how many thousands of people have been audited on those particular incidents, like return to the clam. That is where genetically you were a clam and you're having jaw trouble, and that was one of the bases of, according to Scientology, my father, that's one of the bases of bad teeth, having trouble with your jaws because you were having an engram as a clam 50 trillion years ago.
Suddenly you were nobody. Oh, I've been back 3 lives, you know. I've been back 7, you know. I was in the time of Pharaoh. Well, when I got back to the individual who was a clam lying on a primordial seashore with a grain of sand irritating a pearl inside it, I decided that was as far back as I wanted to go, and I just departed from Scientology.
Hubbard not only drugged his son to act as his scribe, but apparently also used himself in such experiments, typing out frantically the drug-induced revelations as they came through. As Ron Jr. describes, he'd sit at his typewriter late at night and boost up on drugs and hit way at the top and write like crazy. He could type 97 words a minute with 4 fingers. That was the maximum the old IBM electric typewriter would go. When he got into one of these drug trips, he'd write until the body just collapsed. That's the way he worked. Usually, what he had written in a burst would then be allowed to trickle out to the public, the classes he taught. It wouldn't just show up right away. But it was an uneven thing. Sometimes he wouldn't write for a week, then he'd strap on the heavy-duty rockets and up he'd go again.
The first American clear, meaning one who had successfully moved engrams via the E-meter, was one John Starr Cook. Besides being a Crowley disciple and owning Crowley's own hand-inscribed tarot deck, Cook had heavy CIA connections and was also instrumental in the spread of LSD and the initiating of the first human being in 1967, the famous LSD-inspired Summer of Love. As MK Ultra developed out of these earlier OSS cannabis experiments, Bluebird and Artichoke, it is interesting to note that Hubbard is credited with being the first to expose MK Ultra.
He talked about the secret program that was being conducted by the intelligence community using psychiatrists called MK Ultra that we finally found out about it, but it was using drugs and hypnosis in order to create, in essence, a Manchurian candidate.
According to researcher John Attack, Hubbard had himself used LSD prior to its illegality, and Scientologists have dosed their unsuspecting enemies with the drug. Interestingly, Hubbard himself later complained to the FBI that a number of Scientologists had suffered psychotic episodes, which he claimed were the result of psychiatrists surreptitiously giving them LSD.
In 1951, Hubbard authored his second book on Dianetics, Science of Survival, which set out to delineate the human emotional range. Science of Survival is also notable on another account, as the first public disclosure of psychiatric intelligence mind control techniques, later confirmed by the Central Intelligence Agency testimony regarding the MK Ultra project and the Navy's Project Chatter.
Mr. Hubbard's statement was found to be true in the 1970s when the CIA's program became public knowledge after the Freedom of Information Act enabled investigators to document the agency's inhumane and grotesque experiments on human subjects.
The American military were experimenting with LSD as a potential weapon.
Here is a group of normal soldiers responding correctly to a series of routine drill commands. After receiving a small dose of LSD, they're confused and undisciplined.
The idea was to spray the drug on enemy troops. The dose, however, proved rather difficult to control.
The ensuing outcry over the use of mind-bending drugs, which combined with electric shock, caused the deaths or maiming of untold number of people, drew comparisons between the CIA and the infamous Nazi